will record the class on my cassette. So I will play half a sentence, try to figure out what they said, and try to see how I spell it so I can look it up in the thesaurus, so I can look it up in the bilingual dictionary. Every single class, I would do that. So I think I've been breaking those stigmas for myself. And like I said, I had to come out of that box where I feel like people put me in that box because of my name. And they're like, but you don't look Mexican. And I'm like, I don't understand what that means. It's just making that choice and that decision I don't want my life or my story to end here. I love being bilingual. I love who I am. I love my culture. And obviously my name speaks a lot of who I am.
Hola, amiga, and welcome to the Latina Leadership Podcast, the podcast by Latinas for all women. So get ready because today's conversation is really special. Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Latina Leadership Podcast. I'm Gracie, your co-host, and I'm so excited to be here today with Xochitl, and she's going to be here to share her story. So please tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Well, right now, I am a therapist. So I have been in the mental health industry for the last 15 years. I specialize in teenagers, and I have an online course for parenting teenagers, and I have my private practice. I also have a podcast in Spanish. I published a book, and that's only my side gig. I also have another job. So when I tell people that, it's like, whoa, you do all that. But yes, basically, I'm in the mental health environment, and I am doing more speaking engagements and parenting or coaching parenting for teenagers. Yes.
Yes, and I'm so excited to actually learn more about where you're from as well. I know you're from Mexico, and you came here to the U.S.
Yes.
What was it like growing up in Mexico in a wealthy but challenging household?
Yeah, so there's some details that kind of get to where the story kind of changed, and I have reinvented myself. I had to reinvent myself so many times. But so the first 10 years of my life was very, and I am from the border. I was actually born in the States. So, and that's an important fact for something that's going to come out later. But so I was born in the States, but I was raised in Mexico, very proud Mexican family. I mean, my whole family has Aztec names. That's where my name comes from. So the first 10 years of my life were very unsafe. My father worked for the Mexican government, and some years he had a job, some other years he didn't have a job. So it was very, very rocky. And then from when I was 10 years old until 20, my whole life was very different. So at 10 years, my father gets a job with the government, and he gets into a very good position, and he starts growing a lot in the government, the Mexican government. He gets up to when I was at the age of 20, he is in a very high position. Like he's the right hand of the president. So during those years, I remember from being like 13 up until like that age, I mean, we had bodyguards, we had private jets, we had first class, flights to Europe, and the luxury, the Louis Vuittons, sets and the everything. I had a new car every year since the age that I was like 14. We had no limits. We had a very luxurious, we had a very pompous life. And again, my father worked for the government, and he did work for the branch of the government that has to deal with drug administration, kind of like the EA here, but out there in Mexico. So, like I said, you talk Lamborghinis. It was a very different life. Everybody in my town know who I was. And at this time, I'm 47, so this is a long time ago, okay? This is when, the drug cartels existed and the government existed, and we could kind of coexist. It's not like the way it is now that it's, you don't know who is what. So we kind of coexisted. We knew who it was. Now, in my household, because my father had that kind of image, outside of the doors of my house, we had to be the perfect family. We had to pretend. We had an image to keep up. And with my father being in that position, he was very powerful. Everybody knew him. He is a very handsome guy. He's older now, but he'll kill me if I say something else. But very powerful. Everywhere we travel around the world, people will recognize him. if not, he's just a very commanding presence. And that's something that I admired a lot in him growing up. And that's something that I get from him. And I had to, put away, because I'm a girl. I'm a Mexican girl for some time. Now it's come out some more. So, but anyway, so like I said, the image outside of my house was very different than what's happening inside. What was happening inside was narcissistic tendencies from my father, which he had the position for it. I'm not saying, and I talk about this with him being a mental health professional myself. And my whole family on my father's side come from a very educated, wealthy kind of side. So communication style, nothing like that. Healthy relationships, boundaries, there was nothing like that. There was a lot of aggression. Both my parents have very strong personalities, and that's where I get it from. And so it was a lot of fighting, a lot of argument. There was a lot of guns in the house. Because of the job that my father had, we, gunpoint, kidnapping. I never was kidnapped, very close to, but police around my house all the time. You knew there was police outside, but that doesn't make you, that makes you feel safe. That just makes you, that's a reminder of how unsafe you are in that environment. Now, let me tell you, growing up, I thought all this was normal. I thought everybody had got bodyguards. I thought everybody's house was patrolled by policemen 24/7. I did not know that parents were supposed to get along. Parents were not supposed to be yelling at each other all the time and things like that. So, like I said, was inside the house was very extremely chaotic. And my mom was not educated. She started college, but she did not finish. And she comes from another, it wasn't they were a wealthy family, they were a ranch family. So it was another environment, but completely different. So it was a lot of things happening inside my house. Never saw any physical abuse or anything like that, but definitely some emotional abuse, some abuse of power and things like that. So it was very, very chaotic. But like I said, some people might describe it as a good life. I never saw it that way because I could only feel the chaos as a young little girl and even as a teenager. So, I mean, take it or leave it. It's part of my journey, though. It's definitely, now that I see it, it was part of my journey. So my next stage in life, I had that at the age of 20. It was 1997, May 1997, I remember. My father disappears. He disappears from the face of the earth, and we have no idea where he's at. He's a sole provider for the house. But this time we had already moved to the United States. We were living in the United States. I was actually going to the university in Monterrey. So I did all my schooling in Mexico, everything was in Spanish, everything, like I said, I did my elementary, secondary, high school, and I started my college in Mexico. May comes in, my father disappears. It was not uncommon that he would disappear for 2 or 3 weeks because of his job. This was May, June, July came around, and my father was nowhere to be found. Now, we never knew if he was going to be dead or alive. That just came part from being of that law enforcement background and that law enforcement job. So I have no money to pay the university. There's no money anywhere. All the money that's under his name, we can't touch it. We lost everything. My whole life that summer became a completely different picture. Again, I come from a very driven family, especially my dad's personality, extremely driven. I knew I had to go to college. Like, college was not an option. I had to go to college. My grandmother didn't know anything about my dad. Nobody knew anything. Nobody. We couldn't figure out if he was dead or alive. We figured he was alive because there was no body. If it was like a cartel or something like that, we figured they'll show his body just to demonstrate something. So I couldn't go back to college in Mexico because I had no money to pay for it. I had no money to pay for my dorm. So I am in my hometown, which is a border town. They had just opened a university. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll continue my studies here. And this is where my whole life changed. This is my first step into the United States. So I can continue going. I can keep going.
No, I have so many questions now.
Yeah, you can interrupt me if you want me to.
No.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
I guess you ended up finding your dad, obviously.
Yeah, my dad is fine. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, my dad is okay. He disappeared. He had to disappear for 2 years. Sorry, my dog. He likes the camera too. Yes, he's my baby. So yeah, my dad disappeared back again 2 years after. He had to hide. I mean, it was part of his job. If he were to be in contact with any of us, we wouldn't be safe. And again, we understood at that point. We were just glad that he came back home. And so that August, I remember going to the university and I was like, okay, I'm going to apply. And I'm from a border town, like I said. So everybody there speaks English and Spanish. So I would go to university. I was like, I want to go here. Everything in Spanish. I make the application. It was a brand new university, so they were welcoming a lot of people, right? So, and I'm talking to them in Spanish and they answer me in Spanish and we go back and forth. The applications are in English and Spanish, no trouble whatsoever. And I didn't even, because I was like, there was so much going on in my head. We did have a house that was paid for. Everything else we had to figure out. My mother had never worked in her life. I had jobs because I've always been very ambitious. So I've had jobs here and there, but I never had an actual job where I had to work. And we were used to this lifestyle, right? So we had to give all the way. And I have a baby sister too. Well, not baby, she's 44 now. But so my mom and I, we have to kind of think about that. And my personality is very much like, let's take care of business, you know? So like I said, I was like, I'm going to go to college, get a job, and we'll figure it out. We will figure it out. And that's always been, and that's my mom's side that's my mom's side. She's always been able to figure things out. And she's like, there's nothing that we cannot do it if we do it together. So I enrolled at the university and stuff like that. I go to my first class, and like I said, everybody's Hispanic there, but it's a brand new university that brings a lot of professors from all over the country. So I was taking 4 classes, and then 3 of those 4 classes, my professors were American, like gringos, like no Spanish whatsoever. So I go to my first class and I sit there and I stare at him and I'm like, oh, this is in English. I spoke no English. And this is my English class. And I was like, I was like, okay, I guess I'll keep going to my classes and I'll figure something out. And again, this is from my mom's side of what she instilled in me. And so I went to classes for like a week and I was like, I don't know what to do. So I went to the store and I bought a cassette recorder. For those of you that don't know, you can Google it, but it's a portable cassette recorder. And I bought like 30 cassettes. I would go to my classes and I will record the class on my cassette. Go home after my 4 classes. I will go home and I will play the class 2 or 3 words. And I had a bilingual dictionary. There was no Google. There was no phone. There was no computer. And I had my bilingual dictionary and my thesaurus. That was in English. So I would play half a sentence, try to figure out what they said, and try to see how I spell it so I can look it up in the thesaurus, so I can look it up in the bilingual dictionary. Every single class, I would do that. Play 2 or 3 words, try to translate. 2 or 3 words, try to translate. So it would take me about 4 to 5 hours to translate a 45-minute class. So I started doing this, and my professors realized what I'm doing, and they're like, "You can't stay," because I had one. Like I said, one of my professors was Hispanic, and he's like, the professors and I were talking. You can't stay here. You can't be here if you don't speak the language. I'm like, just give me the semester. I promise you. And they're like, "What are you going to do this semester?" I was like, "Just wait," and they put me in front of the dean of education, who's also a Hispanic doctor. And a PhD, and he's, I'm talking to him. I was like, just please give me the semester. He's like, what are you going to do in 1 semester? You're going to learn English? I was like, yeah, I'm going to learn English in 1 semester. He's like, that's impossible, but I'll let you stay. And they put me on probation with 3 classes. So they only left me with the 3 English-speaking professors. And this is about the end of August, beginning of September. by the end of the semester, so the dean of education, he tells me, he's like, by the end of the semester, you need to come in here with your professors, and we'll have a couple other people, and we'll do an interview to you in English. If you can answer our questions in English, you can stay. If not, you have to be out. I was like, okay, challenge accepted. I had no idea what I was doing. So I kept doing the same thing. I kept bringing my cassette and recording the classes, going back home and translating cassette, record, and like that. That's how I learned English. And then also I would play. That was a big deal. This is 1997. The show Friends was a big deal, and I would watch those. I would record the episodes, and I would watch them on repeat and actually speak out the lines that they would say to work on my pronunciation. Nobody had told me anything. I was studying law in Mexico, so nothing to do with education, nothing, but it was just my instinct. I was like, I need to learn English. This is not an option. I need to finish college. So at the end of the semester, long story short, at the end of the semester, I go back to the dean of education with my professors, and it was like 8 people in the room, just one Hispanic, and all of them are gringos. I'm like, oh, okay, let's do this. And they start asking me questions in English, and I answer in English. A very broken English, way worse accent than I have right now. But that's how I started. They never asked me in the beginning. They never asked me if I knew English because I was an American citizen. So they never questioned it. So they start asking me questions in English, and I start answering. And they were like, what? How did you do that? I'm like, well, it wasn't hard. It was just time consuming. Yeah. Like, what do you mean it wasn't hard? Like, you're learning a whole new language in one semester. I'm like, yeah, I know. So, and my whole point to this story, and the reason why I think it's important to share my story, is that whenever you don't see another choice, we are so driven and compelled to make it work. We will make anything work. And that has been my attitude, obviously, since I was little. But that was one of the pivotal moments in my life. I was like, if I put my head into anything, I will achieve it as long as I don't see a plan B. So my life has been driven by only having a plan A. And that was my plan A. So I learned English that semester, and they're like, I guess you can stay. And so I changed my major. Instead of, I was doing law, like I said, in Mexico, because I wanted to be a CIA agent. That was my goal in life, following my father's footsteps, because I admire him so much. And I still do. And so when I came to the States with the English that I learned, obviously it wasn't perfect and I had a lot to learn. I changed my major to business. So I have a bachelor's in finance because numbers were easy. Mm-hmm. So I could understand what the teacher was trying to explain with my broken English and the numbers. And I was like, I can see the numbers. So that's my story about how I came here. So not only that, like I said, I had a full-time job. We had to mend for myself. My whole dynamics in my life completely changed. And, and with that comes a lot. Then I finished college. I got married. I was told I couldn't have kids, and I have 2 beautiful teenage girls now. I have a 16 and an 18-year-old. And that's how I drive my life, just by setting your mind to it, then doing the work. Obviously, you have to do the work, because it was, like I say, it was 4 or 5 hours every day on each class just to finish. And I was working. Don't ask me right now how I did it, but I did.
I was going to ask, how did you have, I guess, that drive and that motivation? Because a lot of people would give up or would take longer to learn it, I guess. Mm-hmm. What motivates you? Like, what drives you like that?
I didn't have a choice. I felt like I didn't have a choice. It was either I learned English or, and no offense to those that flip burgers in McDonald's, that was not going to be the end of my life. That was not going to be my profession. So that's what I kept in my mind. I was like, if I don't learn English right now, I'm going to be flipping burgers for the rest of my life. And I know I'm more capable than that. Like I said, I was in the University in Monterrey. I was one of the best universities. I won prizes and stuff like that. I'm not super bright, to tell you the truth. I have a lot of common sense. I don't consider myself very smart, although people will argue with me all the time. They're like, don't say that. But I come from my father, who is extremely, extremely smart. So I compare myself to him, and my sister is too. So it was just the making the decision, making that choice of, this is not going to break me. This is not this is, I'm going to do this. And like I said, it was just that I didn't have a choice. And that's how I felt. I was like, I need to do this, or I need to do this.
If you're all about education, going back to school, or you're currently navigating college right now, we have something very exciting to share. Our Latinas in Education is coming very soon. So be sure to follow us at Latina Leadership Podcast on our socials, because we'll be updating and you can reserve your spot at our event.
And that was it. And now being a mental health professional and seeing clients because I've been in this for 15 years. I was an educator before, and I relate to my clients, and I know change is difficult, but when you find that one thing that you really want to do, if you really want to do something, you will find a way to accomplish it. So my therapy has always been very goal driven. More like coaching therapy type of situation. And I'm very blunt. It's like, okay, you have trauma, because I had it too. You have trauma. Because I grew up wealthy doesn't mean that I didn't have trauma, that I didn't have a hard life, or that, it was very different. And that was another thing that I had to reinvent myself here when I came to the States. When I was in the border, it was fine. But then I went to Dallas to finish my bachelor's degree. And I felt like people were not used to, at that point, now it's different. They were not used to seeing white Mexicans. And that's who I am. I'm done apologizing for it, because I would get that stereotype of like, but you don't look Mexican. And I'm like, I don't understand what that means. And I was very confused for a lot of years because of my background. And then I felt like I couldn't tell my story. Actually, this is the first time that I'm able to share my story. And I wanted to do it in a bold way, in a podcast that I love and admire, because I felt like I had to hide who I was in my story. Because if you're Mexican, you're supposed to have this story. And I'm like, that's not my story. Doesn't mean that it was easy. It just means it's different. Mm-hmm. When I started my grad school, I remember my professor, she was, again, another person that I admire, but she was like, oh, your parents must be very proud because, first generation Hispanic, or just first generation that you're getting a graduate degree. I'm like, no. And I'm not trying to be arrogant or anything. But it was like, no, I come from a family of doctors and lawyers, and my father was, so things like that. And I was like, that's not my case. And for jobs, I hated to be labeled as the bilingual teacher or the bilingual counselor, because I was so much more than just a bilingual teacher or counselor. So I think I've been breaking those stigmas for myself. And like I said, I had to come out of that box where I feel like people put me in that box because of my name. And they're like, but you don't look Mexican. And I'm like, I don't understand what that means. And then I color my hair. And I still joke about those things because people still kind of get surprised. But we're still human, And so I still had to work so hard for what I wanted, to learn the language. I still had to go through that. And I put myself in that position for me to be able to. I was accepted when I was transferring schools for my bachelor's degree. I was accepted at A&M and UT because I ended up having good grades. And I actually went to Dallas because I had no friends in Dallas. And Dallas had a 90% rate of Caucasian and other, people that only speak English. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to go where my friends were because I was like, I need to force myself to speak English. And so I just made decisions that I knew were going to get me closer to where I wanted to be, which this is not where I wanted to be, by the way. That's a whole other story.
I was going to ask, how did I guess your background and growing up in your childhood, how does that connect to your career now and being health and therapy?
Yeah. So like I said, when I came to the States, I finished with a degree in finance, and my goal was to go back to law school to finish what I started in Mexico. but God had other plans. And I was told since I was 15 years old, I was told by 3 different doctors that I couldn't have kids. Even the doctor that delivered my kids, he told me that I couldn't have kids, and I didn't have any insemination, IVF, or anything like that. I didn't have any of that, but I was told many times I couldn't have kids. So I was very career oriented, very goal oriented. So anyway, I started in banking because I had a degree in finance. I started banking here in Houston. It gets to where I was very young, and I went very high in the company very fast, and I was making decent money for a 24, 25, 26-year-old. And I was an alcoholic. And I'm gonna admit I was an alcoholic. I was having migraines all the time. It was not a good situation for me. I was like, I need to change something. And that's the thing. Also, that message that I want to share with people is, when you know something deep down in you, it doesn't matter how good the situation or bad the situation is. In my case, it was a very good situation job wise. I was making, a very good salary for that age, especially. But I knew it was not aligning with who I was. So I decided to quit that job. And then my then husband, I'm divorced now, but my then husband was like, are you crazy? Look at that much money that you make. You're only 26 and you're going to. So I decided to get out of finance. I had applied for law school 3 years and I wasn't accepted on law school. Even though I had good grades and everything, they're like, we don't understand. It was just, there's so many applicants. So we couldn't get into law school. Part of the reason was that's why I became an alcoholic at that point. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do something easy right now until I can figure out myself again, because I knew who I wanted to be since I was 10 years old. And I saw my father on a pedestal. And I was like, if I cannot be in that pedestal, I have to figure something else. I'm going to go to something easy. I'm going to be a teacher. Hey, well, so ignorant. Because that was not an easy career, obviously. But I did end up being an educator for about 10 years here and there, combined with my mental health. So I started teaching. And then the second day I was in a classroom, I realized, wow, I love this. I love being able to teach. I love being able to have that connection with people and with the kids. It was second grade, my first year. And so being a teacher and seeing the needs of the families, especially our Hispanic families at that point, like I said, this was a while ago, I wanted to do more. So I was like, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to become a counselor, a school counselor. That was my end goal at that point. I said, and then we'll figure out something else from there. So I wanted to do something different in the school district. Let me backtrack a little bit, because during the easy things of teaching, I explored different careers in there. My main one was I wanted to be an actress, and I wanted television. I love television. I love being on stage. I love being on camera and things like that. And I wanted to be an actress. So I did some auditions. I did some local work and things like that. Again, my then ex-husband did not, my then husband, now my ex-husband, he was like, this is not a career path for you. This is not good. And then we became pregnant too. So like my whole life changed. I was like, I have to change gears again. And my focus, I want to be a good mom. I was raised by a stay-at-home mom. So I was having, and that was a difficult time, just making those decisions. But in that, God always makes things interesting. In that situation, we ended up going to marriage counseling. And the marriage counselor was like, well, why do you want to be an actress? Like, what about that kind of interests you? I was like, well, I love understanding the characters and becoming the characters and the emotions and the behaviors and this and that. And he's like, why don't you become a therapist? That's what we do. We just work with, with personalities and with behaviors and emotions. So I was like, oh, I guess I can do that. So I know it's, like I said, it's just things that just kind of happen. And then you make a choice and then you make a decision like, okay, I'm going to go with that. And so that's how I ended up being a therapist, by not only applying my love for the children as I was a teacher, but also, like I said, from a bad situation, we went to marriage counseling, and that came out of that, that time of going to marriage counseling, of me becoming a therapist. So I was like, okay. And that was like a Tuesday. By the next Monday, I was enrolled in school already, because that's just who I am. So yeah, that's how my career in mental health started. And then I had my first child, and then I had my second child, and and I was like I said, I was an educator for some time, and then in mental health, I have done so much, but I've always been drawn to the children. So beginning of my therapy career, I was a play therapist. So that's for little children and that for small children. And then I started seeing a lot of teenagers. And at that point, I was teaching high school kids. And I really felt a connection with teenagers. I really felt like they wanted and they needed to be heard. And so that's when I started specializing in teenagers. I did in mental health. I've done private practice. I've always had my private practice, but I've done agency work. I've done the government. I was actually a forensic interviewer, which is interviewing kids that have allegations of sexual abuse. Very interesting job. I loved it. And, but some changes in my life again. And so I had to leave that job. So I have, like I said, I've done so many. I did the school counseling thing too. And I just love working with teenagers. And now that's my specialty. That's what I love to do. I love coaching parents of teenagers because I feel like the teenagers, they know how to communicate, but the parents are communicating in a different way. And they're just not on the same page. Mm-hmm. So that's a long story. And then, like I said, I always liked the camera. So that's why I was like, I want to have a podcast. And then people will tell me all the time, like, do you have a book? Like, do you have a book? Do you have a book? So now I have a book. And I love what I do. My life has changed so drastically, so many times. I was married for 20 some years. I'm single as of last year. So it's very recent. My oldest one is in college. My youngest is a junior in high school. And I still have so many plans and so many things to do. I love being a speaker. So I do conferences also for parenting or for mental health. So I do like empowerment for women and embracing your power and, kind of unleashing your soul type of thing. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. And now that I look back on my life, there's nothing that you cannot do if you are willing to put in the work, because all those things, and people would tell me, like close friends or families, like, change is so easy for you. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. But it's just making that choice and that decision I don't want my life or my story to end here or just be the bilingual person that doesn't have any more to give than like, I love being bilingual. I love who I am. I love my culture. And obviously my name speaks a lot of who I am. But it's like I have more to give than just speaking Spanish. Like, that's not a skill that I learned. That's the skill that I was born with. So it was just finding my place. It took a lot of turns. It took a lot of setbacks. It took a lot of effort. Like I said, I remember during those times that I was learning English, I remember sleeping 2-3 hours a day. I was young. I could do it. But since that age, just because I didn't have a choice. I knew where I wanted to go. I had no idea I was going to end up here where I'm at because I have a very different, vision of my life. But I knew that my life was going to be more than that. And like I said, when you're a mom, I guess you kind of, you hold off a little bit because I wanted to be the present mom, the mom that was there for my kids, that has a connection and things like that. So I still work when my kids were young. I did my master's degree when my kids were young, and I taught them. I feel like with my example, I taught them that there's nothing impossible for women, whether you want to have children or not. So yeah, that's kind of my story. And like I said, I love connecting with people. Nothing is, we plan and then nothing comes out to how we planned it. But as long as you are determined, that I always felt that call of, this is not enough yet. And my company's called Never Settles, because I never settle. Like, I always want to make sure that I'm doing everything to my biggest potential, I'm very existential too, which means that I'm very, not concerned, but I'm very thoughtful of how the purpose that God has in my life, or what he made me to do in this life. So I'm always thinking about, what's my purpose? Is this the end of my purpose? Do I need to do more? And God is so gracious, and he's like, no, you're not done yet.
Yes. I was going to ask, I know you're not where you expect it to be, right? Like, do you
Yeah.
feel you're where you meant to be? Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's so much more for me to do, right?
There is so much more, and like I said, with my kids also, I was always told I couldn't have kids. So from a very young age, I made the decision that I didn't like kids. I didn't want kids. I didn't even want to get married. And then one thing led to another. And like I said, I had my kids. It was not easy for me. It was like I said, it's not easy for any mom, especially any working mom, to balance that out. But then it's so not funny, but to me, it's a way of the universe working with your life. And it's like, now I coach parenting. Like that was the one thing that was never in my plans. And that's with a transition. And like I said, it's ironic and it's beautiful. It's so complex. And that's who we are as human beings. I love this. I love being a therapist because I learned people's lives. I learned their journey. I love how complex they are and where they come from and their fears and their strengths and their dreams. And I just love that about humans. I love everybody has a story and everybody has a dream that they want to accomplish. And there's so many things that could block us from that. And if we allow it, we'll never reach our true potential. Or if we if life takes us to the left and we're going to go to the right, it's like, oh, well, that's that. And then we give up on our dreams because we think we're going another way, when the whole thing can be just, circle around. It's like, hey, wait a minute. We'll get back there, but just not the way that you thought you would. So, but it's having that attitude, that positive attitude of like, you know what, life is interesting. Life is complex, and I always say this to my kids, it doesn't matter how many times my heart is broken, I still believe in love. I still believe in people. I still trust people. And I'd rather be stomped on 1,000 times before stopping believing in love and people and connection and relationships and, things like that. So.
Yeah, I need to hear about your book. Actually, now I'm curious. So I want to know what's the book, and then how long did it take you? What inspired you?
So the book that is published right now, I'm working on another one that I'm going to publish in the next 2 months. I have a deadline, and that one's about my story because it talks about my story, talks about trauma, it talks about mental health. That one is going to be that's the written book. The one that I have published right now is about parenting teenagers. So that book it's a guidebook. It's a practical guidebook for communicating with teenagers, how to communicate with them. And because teenagers, it's not, a lot of people think, you mentioned the word teenagers and people are like, oh my God. And teenagers are difficult. And oh my God, the teenagers. And like they're so moody. And there's like, we've known this. It's like us complaining about 2-year-olds throwing a tantrum. Like we know this about teenagers. So what I have done is like, kind of, let's get with the same algorithm as a teenager. I say that a teenager, it's not that the teenager is difficult. It's that their brain is in a different algorithm. If anybody knows about the Instagram algorithm, or they can understand that it's just a different algorithm. So my guidebook talks about the communication patterns that they have, so that we adjust to them, and we can actually make a genuine connection. 99% of my clients are teenagers that come to my practice. That's what they complain about. It's like, my parents don't listen to me. I don't feel heard. I don't feel seen. And it's like the parents, we need to make an adjustment. We want to keep continuing raising our teenagers the same way we raised them when they were little. And that's not how it works. So my guidebook, the printed book that I have, is, like I said, it's Enjoy Parenteens. That's the program that I have, my online program. Enjoy Parenteens, and it's the guidebook for that. And it's just very practical information on how do you communicate with your teenager? How do you set up discipline without fighting all the time? How do you set boundaries? Give them freedoms and actually empower them so they can be independent and they can make decisions and have confidence and be assertive in themselves. So that's what that is. And I always tell people that I meet or people that I work with, it's like, I'm not very athletic. I'm not very pretty. I'm not very smart. I'm not very a lot of things. The one thing that God gave me was common sense. So it's very practical. Like you read the guidebook, like just a communication, and your communication with your teenager will change almost instantly if you follow it. just because it's that simple. It's just little tweaks that we have to do for us as adults, and the mentality that we have when talking to teenagers. So that's my guidebook. Yes, that's my book, and I've been very successful with it. And because it's practical, it's a small book, and it's like, oh my gosh, and people send me messages and things like, that makes so much sense. I'm like, I know. But people are not in my industry. People have not been educators for 10 years, mental health professionals for 15 years. So, there's some moms that need to put it together. I needed help when I was raising my own kids, So my best practice is not only as a therapist, but also as a mom. So that's what my book is about. And I have a heart for teenagers. And they're going through such a hard time right now with social media, with electronics and things like that. And I don't want to sound cliche, but it does affect the way that they relate to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been seeing that a lot too. And that reminds me of a quote I saw recently where it was like, it's your parents' first time living too. So like, y'all are trying to learn, that we're trying to learn each other. We're all trying to learn each other and how we live, how we
interact, the dynamics. And even if you have, like my first child, she was a model child, everything. She was very obedient. You had to tell her once. I think I raised my voice with her maybe 2 times. And the worst thing I could tell her is like, I'm going to tell your dad. But for her, that was the end of the world. So I had to parent her one way. And then my second one comes along and she's a little mini me. Oh, that's when I was like, okay, I need help with this. So very different. So even if you are a parent and you have one child and you're like, well, but your sister does this and your sister does that. And your sister didn't do this because they're different. Mm-hmm. So you have to give yourself, have compassion towards yourselves. Like you've been a parent to that child for the first time, but you also been the parent for the first time to this child. So it's not the same. And sometimes people have a hard time adjusting, and they keep comparing the brother, the sister, or the siblings, instead of changing their way of communication to each personality. So, and that's huge also, because if we're comparing the siblings a lot, we're gonna instill some kind of reject the wound of rejection, which can be it's a wound that's gonna turn into trauma later.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And therapy is. I want to bring this up. Therapy is something that's not usually talked about in our community a lot.
Yes.
It's very, got the stigmas. I guess how have you seen it changing recently?
So I do have a podcast in Spanish. Did I mention that in the beginning? I think I did. So my podcast is Platícalo con Xochitl. And that's why I did it in Spanish, because I really think that it's so important for our culture, whether you live in the States or you live anywhere else that speaks Spanish, that to be open to that conversation of mental health. Mm-hmm. I see it a little bit more, but again, the majority of my clients are Hispanic. They're Hispanic that have been in the States for a while. So they're 2nd, 3rd generation Hispanics that they just feel more comfortable with me because their parents are Hispanic, or, because of the culture, because I understand. And I'm also bicultural, so I understand the situation and things like that. But that's why I did my podcast in Spanish, because I think there's a huge gap between understanding what mental health is. And it's not that, and I'm going to say something, it's not very appropriate in the mental health world, but it's not just for locals, that's not what it means. It's just, you're getting, and it's so humbling to actually ask for help. That's a very courageous thing to do, to actually ask for help from a professional. If you keep everything to yourself, like, let me know how that goes. Like, especially if you're going through a transition, if you have trauma in your life, if you had anything like that, or you just don't feel like yourself, you don't have to have a diagnosis. Actually, as a therapist, I don't believe in diagnoses. Or actually, if you ask me about my diagnosis, like I have a different one every week, to tell you the truth, because that's who we are as humans. That's who we're, complex, and that's the beauty of who we are. And so I do not get tired saying that, it's just like, it's okay. You have a story. Now, what are you going to do with that story? How are you going to make it to turn it into fuel to drive your life, to get to your goals, to get to your dreams? So that's my like I said, my podcast is called Platícalo con Xochitl, but my segments are called Del Trauma al Triunfo. So from trauma to triumph, because it's like, first of all, nobody needs to know. And if everybody knows, who cares? Because it's like, we all have something. We all have baggage. As parents, I'm a parent of two, and I know I'm not doing a very good job. Doesn't matter how many letters I have after my name. Our parents did something that's going to affect us in some way. It's not all the parents' fault, but it's okay. We just need to open up about it, so that a lot of the times we pass on the trauma because trauma is transferable, like through generations. Anxiety, when I get a kid with anxiety, it's like who in the house has anxiety? Because anxiety is a learned behavior. So it's like, instead of passing on trauma or anxiety, let's pass on abundance and happiness and peace and being able to talk to somebody and have that courage, and that's obviously, I'm very passionate about everything that I do.
No, I love that. I love
yes.
what you said. I think when you said, like, you got to take your trauma or like your childhood or things that happened to you and really like let it fuel you, let it drive you to be your best self. I really I love that.
Yes. And that's a power that we have. So that, like I said, that's why my podcast is, my segments are called El Trauma al Triunfo, just because we can make it work in our favor. And actually, if you tell me, that's the first thing I'm going to ask when I get up there. But it's like, was that part of the journey? Was that part of my purpose? Did I have to go through that to get to here? And I'm not saying I'm the best one at utilizing my trauma, because like I said, I'm 47, so it took me a while to learn it. But it was like, was it all part of the plan? And God doesn't make mistakes. If you're religious, or the universe doesn't make mistakes, or whatever you want to believe, that's okay. I'm open to, but it's not a mistake. It's part of a journey. It's just, how are you going to take it to help others? How are you going to embrace your story? And that's why I think my story, that's because I had a hard time embracing my story, because at some point I felt like I had to be ashamed for growing up wealthy, for growing up with the way that I did, or for being the color that I am, being the heritage that I felt like I was not appreciated. I was put in a box, and I was like, oh, well, you're, la fresa, or like, things like that. And I'm like, no, I'm not even close to that. And I can't apologize for how I grew up. So, but like I said, it was all part of the journey, because when I lost it all, it was like, oh, now I have to prove myself. And that's the choice that I made. This is how I'm going to choose to rewrite my story, to end my story, or to finish my story. And that's a power that we all have.
Yeah, and you're still writing your story.
Oh, I'm just starting.
Yeah, we have things come up in our lives that are so unexpected. But everything that, like you said, God doesn't make mistakes. It's meant to happen. It's meant to be.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to let some things go, because a lot of the things are distractions in our lives for our purpose and for our journey. And a lot of messages are said to us, especially culturally. I feel like I said, I've seen a lot of female clients. I don't see a lot of adult clients anymore, but I've seen it to where we feel like, because we're Hispanic women, yes, we can have children. And now it's okay to have a career and children, but there's only so much you can achieve in your career. There's only this type of career that you can have, so you can be a good mom. Because if you dream of more, if you're actually ambitious, then you're being selfish, or things like that. And I can feel the energy from family members, from friends and things like that. It's like, no, it's not. It's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to be selfish, because the moment that I'm selfish and I'm doing something for me, that means that I give a better version of myself back to the people that I love, back to my children, back to my friends, back to my job, back to my audience and my podcast. If I'm not selfish, then you're only getting the craps, you're only getting the tire Xochitl. You're only getting the pieces of Xochitl that were left from giving away all of my energy to something else or to somebody else. If I fill in my cup first, I am a better version of myself for my kids and for everybody else. That's not selfish. That is not being selfish. That's being smart. That is living on purpose.
I definitely need to do more of that, more of being selfish and doing things for myself.
Yes.
In order to grow and be my best self.
So I'll be participating in, I don't know if I'm able to say it, but I'll be participating in the, what is the workshop called? The conference that we have on March 7th.
Mind, Body, and Latina Soul.
Mind, Body, and Latina Soul. Yeah. So I'll be participating on that. And part of my segment there, it's going to incorporate a lot of that. And we're going to do some exercises with that material, having some mental health, exercises, not necessarily therapy, because that's, it's a big group, but I'm going to implement some strategies that I've discovered in life that have helped us discover and embrace, like I said, our power, embrace our story, and make it amazing and make it something that works for us in our favor, so we can set a better example for our kids, so we can pass on that power to them and not that trauma or that anxiety,
Yeah, I'm so excited for that.
Yes.
Have you on March 7th.
I am so excited to be there. I was there last year, and I remember seeing that place. And this is when I was starting to embrace my story. So we're talking just about a year ago. And obviously, I've done a lot through, a lot of preparation for this, emotionally and mentally. But I remember being on that event last year, and I was like, this is so amazing. I so want to be part of this. And so I met Angelica, and I met a couple other people that are part of, that's this group. And I was just fascinated. I was like, this is where I want to be. I want to be with my people, first of all, because I feel like I'm at home. And it's a beautiful message. I had a great time last year. So I've been bugging Angelica for a long time to be part of Mind, Body, and Latina Soul for March 7th. So it's going to be great. And I'm so honored to be there. And I'm hoping I have a lot of energy, like you can see. So I hope I can pass it on to other people. And then I get more from the audience too, because I get feed from that.
I already feel it. I feel inspired now.
Yes. And I like I said, it's just being around wonderful people that are on your same, like-minded people and like-minded women, really, that we need so much more of that power in our world, in our culture too. I think there's also that component. So I am very, very excited to be part of that. And like I said, my next book is coming out at the end of April. So that's we're going to be looking, and that's going to be called From Trauma to Triumph. And so that's in the works, and it should be published by then. So I'm very excited about that. So there's conferences coming up too. So I have all my social media updates. And like I said, my podcast is in Spanish, but it's on YouTube and Spotify. So you guys can find me there. My website is xochitrodriguez.com. xochitrodriguez.com. And so you have all my information in there.
You just answered my next question. I was like, what's next for Xochitl? What's next for you?
Yes. And like I said, it's I've learned to make plans and then be flexible with them, but I'm not flexible in my goals. So again, I know I'm very well aware of the gift that God has given me. He's given me a lot of common sense, and he's given me a lot of energy. And I know I belong on a stage. I know I belong on the camera. So that's where I'm going. I'm moving towards doing more conferences. And like I said, just sharing tools and strategies that I've learned, that I've fallen for, that things like that I hope that it helps other people too. It's not that I know better. It's not no, I learn from people as much as I used to learn from my students as much as they learn from me. And so I take it back too. So, but yes, that's what's next. It's the book, the story of my book, the book about my story. There you go. My Spanish is starting to kick in now. It's like afternoon. So, and like I said, a lot of conferences and events and more podcasts, and yeah.
Thank you.
We'll see.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, because I know you said you don't share it like that often. No. But I know you're sharing it in your book, so I'm excited to see that as well.
Yes. I finally feel free to share my story. Like I said, I'm not ashamed of it. I felt like I had to be ashamed of who I was and how I grew up for so long, because it doesn't fit, the regular story of a Hispanic girl in the United States. But it's still a story of resilience. It's still a story of like how many other people came to this country and they had to fight so many things, to make it, or they're still fighting battles to be here, especially, there's so much going on right now, but they're still fighting and they're still finding their place in this country, in this city, in this, and we're so blessed that Houston is so open and so diverse, but still the battle was the same, so it doesn't matter who or where you come from, but the struggle is the same, but the victory can be the same too.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for listening to me. And I know I talk too much.
I feel excited. I'm so excited to see you March 7th now.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, you can find me at xochitlrodriguez.com. And I am here to serve all of you.
Thank you for joining us in this amazing conversation today. And if you need more information or resources, as always, they'll be in the description below. Please don't forget to follow us everywhere at Latina Leadership Podcast to stay updated with our latest releases, events, updates, and more. And with that, we'll see you next time.